The convoy slid through the frostbitten flats before sunrise, engines humming low against a slate-blue sky that hadn't made up its mind about snow. It was supposed to be a milk run. 3 up-armored MRAPs, a boxy ambulance variant in the rear with a red crescent stencil, and a logistics truck sagging under pallets of heater fuel and MREs. The route ran from forward operating site Vostok to a satellite relay compound 10 kilometers east, NATO footprint in a country that pretended not to be a battlefield. On the manifest, she was driver KCVAC, rank E6, call sign Med2. In the driver's seat, Staff Sergeant Ava Navarro kept both hands light on the wheel, eyes moving in a quiet triangle, mirrors, windscreen, instrument panel, like a metronome only she could hear. They barely looked at her. They never did. In the lead MRAP, Corporal Trey Reddick, tank gunner turned infantry because budget lines moved and people followed, made a show of yawning over the radio. Copy, Med 2, keep the crayons between the lines. Laughter came back from someone in the truck, the flat, performative kind that stuck to the radio net like grease. Ava tapped her mic once for acknowledgement and said nothing. She didn't correct his route vernacular or remind him the ambulance's wheelbase didn't love rutted ice. She didn't say that 3 weeks ago he'd turned his armor too wide on a narrow bridge and she'd feathered the brake just enough to give him the space he didn't know he needed. She didn't say anything because the quiet was useful. At Vostok, the quiet had turned into a story other people told about her when they thought she couldn't hear. The platoon leader, First Lieutenant Adil Malik, kept it professional but distant, the way officers did when a soldier's personnel file read motor transport, medical support, and not door kicker. The senior medic, Staff Sergeant Priya Shah, liked her. Priya noticed the way Ava cross-loaded tourniquets for one-handed access, how she routed saline lines with painter's tape and fabric bands to keep them from snagging on body armor. Chief Warrant Officer Eric Anders, the maintenance officer, watched how she positioned herself in briefings. Out-of-foot traffic lanes, facing exit points, elbows close, weight balanced. He pretended he wasn't watching and she pretended not to notice. Vostok was a prefab geometry of blast walls and steel doors, generators coughing in the cold, drones zipping out on lazy arcs to count heat signatures that kept multiplying in the tree lines no one called forests. The official language for what was happening beyond the HESCO barriers was gray zone activity. The unofficial words, raid, ambush, sabotage, felt truer in the mouth. People floated through rotations humming with phones, full of frozen lakes and city lights from home. Ava kept her phone in airplane mode, screen black. They teased her for the way she logged miles like a watchmaker, the way she ran post-mission checks with a pen light, even at noon. Brake lines, wheel wells, bolts, coolant, serpentine belt tension, door hinges, door seals, door... Click. The penlight paused when the beam found a hairline crack in the latch assembly for the rear door, metal fatigue from the cold. She flagged it. Anders made a note. 2 hours later, he came by with a new latch and a joke about overachieving ambulance drivers. He set the latch on the fender. "You see this from 20 paces?" he asked, halfway joking, halfway curious. 15, she said. The shadow was wrong. He watched her for half a heartbeat longer than people usually did. Then he grinned and slapped the fender. "We'll get it swapped, Staff Sergeant." In the motor pool, Specialist O'Neill practiced pronouncing the names of villages on his route card like he was studying for a test. Private Kuznetsov, conscript's kid, fluent in the language of the border, rolled a cigarette he wouldn't smoke inside. The talk drifted, as it always did, to who had done what downrange. Reddick had stories about a deployment that started hot and cooled off into guard shifts, and he told them with the swagger of a man who kept his fear in the glove box next to the registration. O'Neill had a tattoo he hadn't earned but wanted to. Kuznetsov didn't say much. He listened like listening was the job. Ava kept her rifle on the rack inside the cab, clean enough to pass inspection, zeroed the way she liked it. Optics set 1 click low because she'd learned to account for cold board drift in weather like this. Her hands remembered things she did not advertise. Bolt speed, trigger wall, the tiny shift in sight picture when you breathe into your collar in winter. She said little. She smiled when appropriate. She drove like a metronome. The story of her was simple, and simple stories are easy to file. It was in the common area, on an evening that smelled like wet wool and instant coffee, when Priya dropped next to her at the metal table. "You always sit with your back to the wall," Priya said conversationally. "Habit. You always pick the chair with sightlines on 2 doors in the service window." Ava stirred her coffee. "Coincidence?" Priya smiled. "The way Anders looks at your vehicle checks? He's not flirting." "I didn't think he was." "So what are you, Navarro?" "Motor transport, medical support." The answer came smooth. Priya's laugh was quiet and kind. "Sure, and I'm the Queen of Denmark. See you on shift." The rumor machine spun up, that Ava had once been a paramedic in a city that never stopped screaming, that she'd done a tour with civil affairs and learned languages through osmosis, that she was just trying to ride out knees that clicked going upstairs. The rumors were useful too. They built a fog where facts would have made people ask for more than she wanted to give. Underestimations became armor. She wore it without visible weight. On the 3rd week of the deep freeze, the command post pinned a printed brief to the corkboard under a thumbtack that still smelled of pine. It read, like all the others, increased SIGINT chatter, low-cost drones with explosive payloads, supply lines probed, civilian traffic patterns altered. Maintain vigilance, adjust postures. People nodded. People went back to their routines. The sky stayed undecided. The quiet kept doing its quiet work. Ava cleaned the windshield with vinegar and rubbing alcohol so the frost wouldn't fog when she breathed. She rewrapped the tourniquets. She told her bones to be light. She told the part of her that once lived at a different tempo to keep sleeping. Outside the wire, something listened back. It started in small, uncooperative ways. Drones out of range hung a little longer on the horizon. The relay compound's camera feeds blinked once an hour like someone was tapping the line with a finger. The intel summary slid across Lieutenant Malik's desk, all cautions and caveats. "Potential for multi-axis pressure," it said. "Unknown actors leveraging local auxiliaries." Priya skimmed it at breakfast and chewed her toast like it was a problem. Reddick called it another paper tiger. Anders signed out 2 spare alternators and a crate of filters like he could repair luck. Ava's checklists got longer. She didn't add boxes, she added behaviors. She ran the ambulance's engine to heat, then killed it and timed the cool-down curve. She stripped and rerouted the radio's power leads to a separate fuse so comms wouldn't die with the engine under load. She taped a narrow bead of fluorescent thread on the interior door handles where fingers fumble in the dark. She moved the med bag so it could be accessed with a knee and a single hand while the other hand kept pressure on a wound. She didn't talk about why she knew to do these things. She just did them. In the tent where the map lived, Malik briefed the platoon on route changes. "We'll stagger departure by 2 minutes," he said, tapping grease pencil lines that zigzagged around red X's, roads left unplowed, bridges that groaned under heavy weight. "IED risk remains low, EW threat moderate. If we get spoofing, the backups are paper and your head's on a swivel." "What about the chatter?" O'Neill asked, trying to make it sound casual. "The multi-axis pressure." Malik's mouth thinned. "We've had provocation before. We have rules. We follow them. We don't get pulled into someone else's escalation ladder. We do our jobs." Jobs. Jobs helped. People cleaned weapons again, not because they were filthy, but because the ritual took the air out of a room that had too much of it. Priya relabeled the narc box with a new Sharpie. Reddick told a joke he knew wasn't funny, just to see if anyone wanted to laugh. They didn't. He looked at Ava. "You don't get nervous?" he asked, as if he was asking about the weather. "I get ready," she said. He made a face like that was either profound or profoundly annoying. Anders caught her in the motor pool at 2100, sleeves rolled up, grease in his fingerprints, the way of a man who trusted hands. "You rerouted your radio," he said. Not a question. It shares power with the engine fan otherwise. "You're not wrong." He watched her for a moment. "Where'd you pick that up?" "Field maintenance seminar." She met his eyes and let them slide off. He didn't push. He stood next to her in the silence, like the silence was a third person. Then, he said, almost lightly, You know there's a course at Graf that teaches that exact fix. I've heard. You ever been to Graf? Ava smiled like a postcard. Only in nightmares. He laughed. Fair. In the gym, she didn't throw iron around like Reddick, didn't chase a deadlift PB. She did the kind of training that made your heart live at the back of your throat. Sled drags, farmer carries, sandbags heaved into the bed of a truck and out again. Kuznetsov watched once, quiet. My mother carried water like that, he said, halfway wonder, halfway memory. Then your mother is stronger than I am, Ava said, and meant it. The warning that finally made Malik's eyebrows knit came from the drone cell. Swarms rehearsing over the same grid squares, someone testing wind and range and redundancy. Priya found Ava in the aid station, reorganizing the med cabinet by touch. You mark your gear like you'll be reaching for it blind, Priya said. Sometimes you will be. You talk like the sky knows your name. Ava paused. The sky doesn't care, that's the point. The sky turned pewter. Snow teased and retreated. The generator hiccuped, and Anders swore with the fluency of a man who'd been cold on every continent. The night before the convoy, Malik did his walk, a habit he'd picked up from a captain who'd picked it up from someone before him, moving cot to cot, eye to eye. He stopped by Ava's rack. You've been rock steady, he said. I appreciate it. She nodded. Copy. I need your head on comms if Priya's hands are full. Can you juggle both? I can juggle. He hesitated. You ever done anything other than drive? She looked at him, and because he wore the responsibility like a visible thing, she offered him a breadcrumb. I've done support for people who do things. His eyes searched her face and found only the answer she'd offered. He nodded. We pull at 0530. At 0400 she woke without an alarm, the way you do when your body believes the clock more than your mind. She tucked a hand warmer into the glove box, taped a spare pressure dressing under the dash, tightened her bootlaces twice. The world outside the tent was brittle and clean, her breath ghosted. Somewhere past the wire a fox barked at something it would never understand. Reddick climbed into his MRAP like a man mounting a horse. Let's go make friends, he said into the net. Kuznetsov muttered something in his first language that might have been a prayer. O'Neill cracked his knuckles and wished he hadn't. Priya hauled her aid bag into the back of the ambulance and bumped Ava's shoulder with her knuckles. See you on the other side, Priya said. Copy, Ava answered, set the transmission, and eased them toward the gate. She watched the gate guards' faces the way sailors watch birds. The guards were trying to look like this was routine. Their eyes said they knew better. The world narrowed to white road and black rubber, and the chatter of the radio like rainfall behind glass. The convoy rolled east. The sky kept its secrets. Somewhere ahead, the weather ended. The first contact wasn't the explosion, it was the absence of noise. The relay compound's generator feed dropped to 0 on the net. Then the drone cell reported a sudden bloom of heats in a latticework pattern that engineers would have recognized as beautiful if it weren't trying to kill people. Reddick's voice cut off mid-sentence like a door slammed in a windstorm. The air pressed flat. Ava felt the hairline shift in the world the way a diver feels current change. EW spike, Malik said over the net, too calm. Switch to Alt 2. Alt 2. Comms stuttered, found themselves, stuttered again. The convoy topped a shallow rise into a valley that didn't look like a valley until it collected the wind and funneled it through their radiators. The explosion hit the lead MARAP on the right front, not a buried IED, but a drone-dropped charge that found an armor seam with educated luck. It lifted the vehicle half a foot, shoved it left, and set it down with a bang that broke something inside everyone's ears. The MRAP kept moving. Credit to Reddick and the engineer who'd designed the thing like a bulldog. Hit, 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 Reddick barked. Vehicle operational, glass spidered. His voice had the wobble of adrenaline, the tremor that says, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. Then the ridgelines came alive. On the north slope, muzzle flashes stitched the snow. South slope, a heavier thump, 12.7 mm by the cadence, reached for the convoy like a hammer. A mortar coughed somewhere meters outside the range table, and somehow good enough. The logistics truck braked too hard, fishtailed, corrected. Malik's voice cut through. Push through the kill zone. No stopping. Made 2. Keep rolling. Ava's world telescoped. Distance and angle. Drift. The ambulance's mass versus ice friction. She took the right side of the road where the ruts were deeper, felt the rear slide, corrected with a touch. "Priya, strap in," she said, voice small and perfectly level. Priya swore and did as told. The first burst of DSHK rounds walked across the road ahead like stitching on a wound. The second burst found the ambulance's passenger side mirror and turned it into a silver flower. "Contact rear, South Ridge," O'Neill called, more honest fear than radio discipline. "Multiple shooters, at least one heavy." Smoke out, Malik ordered, and the lead MRAP popped canisters that painted the road with a white wall. Useful for line of sight, less so against thermal optics, which the enemy might or might not have. Ava drove into the smoke like it was weather. The world went milk-white, and her pupils tried to become cameras. She kept the ambulance centered on the ruts by feel and the faint left-right memory of a route she'd driven in daylight twice before. The next hit was not theirs. It was the relay compound. A column of dark smoke punched up beyond the ridge, signal of grid cells popping like bubble wrap. The heavy south gun chewed at them with admirable discipline. Short bursts, correction, short burst. Whoever was on the trigger knew enough not to overheat the barrel. The burst walked toward the ambulance. Ava saw the line it wanted and stole that line from it by moving 2 meters left at the exact wrong moment for the gunner's guess. Rounds bit air where she had been. "Med 2, we've got wounded," Reddick said. Too much noise under the words. "Driver's side spall got coups. He's breathing, bleeding. We need a ride to the aid position." "Negative," Malik cut in. "We push through, consolidate at phase line Sawyer. Med 2, stand by for triage once we're under the ridge." The heavy gun answered the radio with noise. A round punched through the ambulance's side panel, missed Priya by a hand width, and turned the cardboard cup holder into a confetti storm. Priya's laugh was wild. "That close enough for your taste?" "Almost," Ava said, and jinked the wheel again. She could feel the gun now. She could feel the triangulation of it. South Ridge, 200 and change, line of fire slanting through a tree clump to the bend in the road. She tasted copper that wasn't blood. The convoy made the bend. The white wall thinned into smoke lace. The heavy gun had them ranged. The next burst would be perfect. The ambulance's engine coughed. Not a hit, fuel starved from slosh on the grade. Ava feathered the throttle, caught the catch, and cursed softly. The road widened into a turnout partnered with a culvert underpass, a concrete throat built to swallow spring melt. "Lieutenant," she said, voice that didn't belong to the storm. "We will not make the aid position while that gun has us. I can flank it. The culvert runs to the south slope. I need 6 minutes." "Denied," Malik said, instantly. Good officer instincts refusing heroics. "We move as a unit." "Sir," Priya cut in, not politely. "We are going to start dying in 30 seconds if that gun doesn't shut up." The next burst buzzed the ambulance's roof, a sound like ripping sail. O'Neill swore a prayer. Reddick's MRAP threw another smoke can like a magician's flourish. Someone on the ridge laughed, and the laugh carried as if it had a microphone. Ava turned the wheel, let the ambulance's nose drift toward the turnout like she'd been forced there, then cut hard and slid behind the cover of the culvert mouth. The world went gray and close. She killed the engine. The sudden silence rang. "Navarro!" Malik barked, half fury, half fear. "Hold your position." "Yes, sir," she lied, and looked at Priya. "Give me 8 minutes." "I can give you 5, Priya said, eyes huge and holy. Ava grabbed her rifle and the slim assault pack she kept braced under the seat. She left the radio on the dash so Priya could hear the net. "Lock it as soon as I'm out." "Where are you going?" "Errand," Ava said, tugged her gloves tight, and dropped into the throat of the culvert. Cold water soaked her knees instantly, the stink of iron and algae alive in the concrete tube. The roar of the world became a muffled heartbeat. She moved a crawl that used elbows more than knees, the rifle forward, sling tight, breath counted. She marked the distance by the hum of the generator that had been at the relay compound before it died. She marked it by the memory of the drone maps she wasn't supposed to have memorized. The culvert bent left. The sound of the heavy gun grew teeth. She killed the light. The exit was a ragged oval of winter and noise. She counted breaths. She thought of foxes. She thought of the sound a bolt makes when it's eased forward instead of let slam. She thought of nothing at all. She came up behind the south ridge's shoulder like a hand out of water. The gun nest was cut into the berm in a clever half-moon, shielded from direct fire, with a line-of-sight lane to the road. A man on the trigger, one feeding a belt, one spotting with binoculars that had no business being that good. Professional enough to die in order. Ava let the rifle nestle. Sight steady. Breath out. The first shot was for the spotter. He would scream. He didn't get the chance. The second shot cut the feedman's throat of choices. The trigger man was already turning, the heavy gun swinging on a base that wasn't built for sudden reversals. He was too slow. The third shot found him. The heavy gun gurgled to silence, and the ridge felt, for a beat, like a held breath being released. Med 2! Priya's whisper crawled in Ava's ear from the ambulance radio left open, barely there, an insect whisper. Please say that was you. South heavy neutralized, Ava said, voice small and clean. You're clear to roll. She took the heavy gun's grip and turned it downslope, a sentinel stolen and repurposed. She threw a belt across and sighted where she knew the next team would crawl. She waited. When they came the way trained men do. Low, quick, sure. She chewed the slope with short, controlled bursts, teaching the ridge new geometry. Over the net, Malik's voice contained fury, relief, and a note he would examine later for the rest of his life. All call signs. Collapse to phase line Sawyer. Med E2. Hold your position and provide cover if able. Copy, Ava said, and made the ridge her instrument and played. The firefight cooled into a weird winter silence, broken only by radios, the crack of ice under boots, and the metallic sigh of hot things remembering they were cold. The convoy bunched under the lee of the ridge where the wind couldn't find them, vehicles angled like animals nosing into a thicket. Priya moved like a metronome, blood on her gloves that steamed in the air. Anders barked at a radiator hose like it could hear. Reddick sat on his bumper and blinked at nothing, and then everything, and then nothing again. Ava came down the south slope with the heavy gun's barrel cradled in her elbow like a strange baby, and 3 confiscated rifles slung barrel down, magazines taped in jungle-style 2s. Snow scuffed her knees. Dirt lived under her nails. Her eyes were black coffee. She looked smaller than the weight she carried. People saw her. They really saw her. Reddick's mouth worked. You, he said, and left it there. O'Neill took the heavy gun from her without asking the right question. Priya bumped her helmet to Ava's helmet like a prayer. I told you 5, she said. You gave me enough, Ava answered. Malik walked toward her with 2 equal and opposite instincts wrestling behind his face, the desire to grab her by the collar and the desire to put her in for a medal. He did neither. He stopped a meter away. The distance officers learn. Staff Sergeant Navarro, he said, using her full rank like armor against something he didn't yet understand. What did you just do? Flanked the south heavy, eliminated the team, reoriented the gun for covering fire. She said it like she was reciting a grocery list. Malik's eyes closed briefly, like he had a headache behind them. When he opened them, a civilian stood at his shoulder, a man in a good parka that had seen worse weather, haircut like he remembered barber chairs, eyes that kept going even when they looked like they'd stopped. He wore a lanyard that said nothing and everything. You're late, Malik said to him. Rhodes, the man answered, accent so standard it sounded foreign. He turned to Ava. Staff Sergeant Navarro, he said, like he'd read the name, but also like he'd always known it. My name is Elaine Bennett, Defense Intelligence. We're going to have a conversation. Ava felt a tiredness start 2 vertebrae below her skull. She nodded. She could feel Priya stiffen at the word intelligence, as if the cold had remembered her bones. Anders drifted closer like he'd been there all along. Reddick pretended to check a tire. O'Neill pretended not to listen with his whole body. Kuznetsov, whose blood had stopped with pressure and a bandage that would leave a forever line, watched like a kid at the circus, eyes huge, believing he'd just seen someone pull a building out of a hat. They made a small circle of heat behind a MRAP. Bennett produced a metal clipboard like a magic trick. Malik's breath hung in the air, impatient. "Her file," he said, "says motor transport and medical support." Bennett nodded, compassionate but not apologetic. "It does." He flipped a page. Staff Sergeant Navarro also has an access-restricted memorandum about previous assignments. She served as an enabler with a Joint Special Operations Task Force, mobility, logistics, and, when necessary, kinetic support. She is deployed with Navy Special Warfare, Marine Raiders, and units that are really only acronyms. She has moved boats through places that deny boats exist, airdropped fuel in the dark to people who were never there, and sat still for 6 hours in a hole smaller than her patience waiting for someone who did not know he was about to be unlucky. He turned another page like he was changing a song. None of that is on the paper you're allowed to see when she's assigned to you in a conventional role. Silence didn't fall. It rose. Anders blew air through his teeth. Priya didn't blink. Reddick made a small, involuntary sound that might have been, "Huh." Malik looked at Ava, not Bennett. "Is this accurate?" he asked softly. Ava answered without looking anywhere but his face. "Yes, sir." "Why are you here?" he asked, not acidic, genuinely wanting to understand. "And not there." "Transition program," she said. There it was, a phrase that meant a lot and explained little. They rotate support personnel out after a while. Keep heads straight. Cross-pollinate. Make sure skills don't calcify in one ecosystem. I volunteered. I wanted to teach. I wanted to see if I could be small again. "Small?" Priya echoed, something brittle breaking gently in the word. "Uninteresting," Ava clarified. "Invisible. Useful in other ways." Bennett folded the clipboard closed. "No negative administrative action will be taken because of what she did today," he said, and it wasn't a favor. Her actions fall under immediate defense of friendly forces during an unanticipated escalation. She did what needed doing. Mullock rubbed his eyes with his thumb and forefinger, old man gesture on a young face. "I'm not looking to write her up," he said. "I'm trying to square the circle where I didn't know I had a ringer behind the wheel of my ambulance." Bennett looked at Ava. "We can pull you back," he said. "Right now. There are billets open. Teams that will use what you can do. You take a shower, you get on a rotary bird. This becomes a farewell tour you didn't know you were on." Ava looked past him at the convoy, at O'Neill and Kuznetsov and Reddick pretending to be very interested in recovering a toe strap correctly. At Priya, who was the kind of person people go back into fires for. At Anders, grease under his nails and in his soul, who would fight a generator with a wrench and win. She thought about the weight that had rolled off the convoy's back when the heavy gun had gone quiet. She thought about the way underestimation had bought her time and position. She thought about the sound a medal makes in a drawer and the sound a good lesson makes when it lands. "With your permission," she said to Malik, not to Bennett, "I'd like to finish this deployment here. Drive, teach. Make sure the next time someone points something big at us, they regret it faster." Bennett didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who had bet this way. He nodded. "We'll annotate appropriately." Malik's shoulders lost a centimeter of tension and gained something else: respect, fear, hope, all cousins by marriage. "Fine," he said, because he had to perform the role of the reasonable man. Then, quieter, "Thank you." Reddick shuffled one boot. "Sergeant," he said, recognizing rank like a handhold, I said some stuff about crayons and lines." Ava blinked the snow out of her eyelashes. "Keep saying stuff," she said gently. "Just learn to check your blind side when you do." They laughed. It wasn't the first laughter of the day, but it was the first one that made the air warmer instead of thinner. Priya touched Ava's sleeve. "If you're teaching," she said, "I'm your first student." "Second," Anders said from somewhere left. "I want the module on spotting cracked latches from 15 paces. 17 in low light," Ava said, and the smile that threatened her face felt like mutiny and relief. They loaded the wounded. The road home was quieter in decibels and louder in everything else. The relay compound would get rebuilt. The ridge would keep its secrets under new snow. The clipboard would return to a pocket. Clearances would close like doors. People would drive past this piece of landscape and never know it remembered them. Paper would continue to say what papers say. The people who were there would remember what the cold felt like on their gums. At the gate, the guard who'd tried to look routine and failed hours ago lifted a hand. "Welcome back," he said, and meant it like a blessing. The weeks after the ambush didn't look like a movie. They looked like training calendars with ink that bled through to the next page. They looked like Anders cursing at a parts manifest that claimed a fuel pump existed when it did not, and then fabricating the bracket himself because belief is a tool. They looked like Priya and Ava standing shoulder to shoulder over a whiteboard drawing bloodlines and timelines and writing march vertically, massive hemorrhage, airway, respiration, circulation, hypothermia/head injury, until the letters lived in other people's hands. Ava wrote "under fire then what" on a flip chart in block letters that didn't care if you liked them. Reddick sat in the front row like a penitent. O'Neill took notes like his wrist owed someone money. Kuznetsov listened with the ancient attention of farm boys whose families have survived by noticing when the wind changes. "This is not about being special," Ava began. "This is about being boring at a very high level. You do the boring things no matter how loud the world gets." She talked about moving in pairs, in threes, in the kind of fours where one man's mistake becomes four men's elegy. She demonstrated a shoulder drag on Reddick, who made a show of being heavy, and then didn't have to pretend when she moved him anyway. She showed how to turn tourniquets with gloves on without bleeding grip. She made them practice in mittens, in the cold, in the dark. Priya ran a parallel station on needle decompression with an orange and a promise. "Respect the intercostal space," Priya said like a benediction. They walked the convoy route at night. Ava had them stop where the smoke had been thickest and close their eyes. "Listen to the slope," she said. "It will tell you what it wants." She made them learn the culvert entrances by foot count, not GPS. She sent pairs crawling until their knees hated poetry. She taught them to tape a pressure dressing where their hand would find it and to tie their hair back before a fight because hair becomes a handle, and that is a different kind of physics. She said "we" more than "I" and never said "hero." When Reddick thanked her too loudly, she raised an eyebrow until the sound embarrassed itself. Malik stood in the back of the room during most of it, arms crossed, wearing the face of a man evaluating. He occasionally asked a question designed to be a brick she could trip on. She didn't trip. Sometimes she turned the brick into a step for someone else to use. He went back to his office and wrote emails to people with stars on their collars that contained words like initiative and low-cost, high-impact and reduces fragility. Bennett sent a one-line reply that said, "This is what transition should look like." Anders lobbied for more time with her for the motor pool. "Combat is logistics," he said to anyone who would sign a form, short or long. "You want fewer dead? Give me time with her and a whiteboard near a parts cage." He got his time. Ava taught the drivers to think like mechanics, and the mechanics to think like drivers, and both to think like people who might have to be one another when the world ran out of options. She had them strip radios to bare wire and rerun them on independent fuses. She taught them to spot counterfeit bolts by weight in a gloved palm. She showed them how to stage vehicles in a Lager with medical egress lanes that wouldn't clog when fear drove. The base changed by degrees small enough to miss if you weren't counting. Guards at the gates started rotating positions counterclockwise every 2 hours to break pattern analysis. Priya's med cabinet was reorganized according to reach zones, and one night a private reached without looking and found what he needed and didn't cost someone a minute they didn't have. Reddick stopped making jokes on the radio when they were on open net. O'Neill stopped cracking his knuckles every time the wind shifted. Kuznetsov started teaching people the words he used to pray with, not to make them believe, but to make them breathe. On a gray day that felt like other gray days, a courier handed Malik a file with commendation language that read like the truth had been made presentable. He signed where he could. He took the extra page that said, "Classified Annex follows," and slid it into a safe that hummed with other people's stories. He signed his name to a letter recommending Ava as an instructor at Grafenvor's Convoy and Kasevak School, the program Anders had joked about, then asked for, then actually gotten. He walked to the motor pool with the letter in his pocket. He found Ava under a hood, sleeves pushed up, hair tied back, a wrench in one hand and a coffee in the other. He waited. She finished what she was doing and closed the hood. She wiped her hands on a rag that had never been clean. He held out the letter. "You don't have to take it," he said. His voice didn't have the command voice in it. It had the voice people use at tables when the dishes have been cleared. "You can stay. We need what you are." Ava read. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She took a breath that looked like a decision forming around air. "I'll go," she said softly, not because she wanted out, but because multiplication is a moral act. "I can make 10 of me, maybe more." "You already have," he said, and looked surprised he'd said it. They made a plan that wasn't a plan. Dates penciled, handshakes offered. Priya hugged her so hard the air squeaked. Anders tried to hug her, and then pretended he had grease on his hands. Reddick brought her a gift that was mostly a joke, an ugly knitted hat with a pom-pom the size of a grenade. And when she put it on, he turned away so no one would see his face, remembering a ridge. On her last convoy before the handoff, the road threw them nothing but cold. The radio talked about weather and nothing else. They took the turn where the heavy gun had spoken, and the snow laid a new skin over the old scar. Ava drove like the road belonged to the people who needed it. At the checkpoint, Kuznetsov leaned out the MRAP turret and shouted, "Sergeant, you will be late to your important school if you stop to fix our terrible driving." "Then don't make me stop," she called back. At the gate, the guard who had said welcome back months ago said it again, like a ritual. The base looked like itself. The generators coughed, drones stitched the sky, someone burned toast. It could have been any Tuesday in a place that sometimes pretended to be Tuesday. Ava went to the aid station and wrote one more thing on the whiteboard. "Fear ills information." She underlined it twice. She turned to the room. "You will be scared," she said. "That's good. That's your brain telling you the stakes are high. The question is, what will you do with the information?" She let the silence answer. It did a good job. Bennett appeared at the doorway like a punctuation mark. He didn't carry a clipboard. "Birds at 1600, he said. "You'll hate the coffee." "I already do," she said. He hesitated. "You can come back," he added. "If you want, the door's not a trap." She nodded. "I know." It was both acceptance and refusal and a promise to keep choosing. At 15:45, she stood by the landing zone with a ruck that looked smaller than the things she carried. Priya pressed a package into her hands, gauze and a Sharpie and a silly sticker that said Medicish with a cartoon heart. Anders handed her a torque wrench tagged, "For luck, not for use." Reddick offered a salute that was sloppy and perfect. Malik shook her hand, then did the thing officers rarely do and hugged one of their own. Like all the rules were for peacetime. The rotor wash flattened the snow into submission. The helicopter came in ungainly and gorgeous, like a bumblebee with a degree. Ava climbed the step, turned, and saw them all. Little figures in parkas, the geometry of a base that had unlearned a piece of fragility. She raised a hand. She didn't wave. In the air, the world fell away and then returned. As it always does, resized. She looked out the open door at the ridges and roads and culverts that would forget her name and keep the impressions of her boots for an hour. She let herself imagine a classroom where the whiteboard would take new ink and the faces would be new and the same. She let herself imagine Reddick teaching someone else how to tape a pressure dressing where a hand will find it. She let herself imagine Anders teaching a private how to hear a radiator lie. She let herself imagine Priya's hands moving like metronomes in a different winter. She closed her eyes. She let the rotor thrum be the metronome now. People talk about heroes like they arrive with trumpets. Most of the time they arrive with a wrench and a checklist and a way of walking a room that makes the exits feel like friends. Most of the time they leave the same way. If you looked for noise, you'd miss them. The sky didn't learn her name. It didn't need to. Everyone who mattered already had. And somewhere, on a ridge under new snow, a culvert remembered the echo of someone who had crawled through to make a gun stop talking. And the road remembered being a road again.